Hey folks, Jeff Liskay here from Great Lakes Fly Fishing. I'm here to help out the Natural History Museum Trout Club here in Northern Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio. And we're going to talk a little bit about spay casting, but we're going to do a series of casts, and we're also going to do like a very introduction series here. But first off, we're going to start out with why would you want to learn how to spay cast? Well, realistically, you can do it with your 3-weight, you can do it with any single hand rods. It's just a good tool to have in your quiver to understand how to cast with backdrops are close to you, trees underneath you, but it's just a good tool to have to practice for your fishing skills. Next up, we'll just start talking about just an introduction to these casts. Howdy folks, Jeff Liskay back here for the Natural History Museum Trout Club, and we're going to talk about our spay casting series, but I think we'll start out with the lines that we might be thinking about. So we talked about you can use any rod that you want, from your standard 3-weight trout line to your 5 or 6-weight trout line, but there are a few specific lines that we try to do for spay casting. The 3 general categories that we generally think about are Scandinavian, Skagit, and traditional. But in our geographic area here in Northern Ohio, you know, we swing in flies for steelhead or swing in flies for trout or wherever you be. What we're using is a Skagit line. And a Skagit line is nothing more than it's like a projectile. It's a very short, aggressive line. The one I'm using here today is Scientific Angler Spay Light Skagit. Another one you could use is Scandi, but this right here is the this is the Skagit line. And then we have, I'm using an 11-foot 5-weight Scott rod here. This is my go-to trout spay. This is my go-to steelhead rod around here in the runoff country of South Shores of Lake Erie. And then on the end of this Skagit line, what we have is one key rule of thumb we have to have is that on a Skagit line, at the very end of it, because the diameter is so thick, you always have to have a tip on the end of this line. You just can't attach your monofilament line leader to it. So you have to have a tip, and that transitions the energy down. This is a Scientific Angler TC tip, and it is float with a sinking portion on the end. And then you have your leader section. This leader section could be anywhere from 14 inches to 4 feet, depending on the venue that you want to fish. Hey, Jeff Liskay here again. We're here to continue our series on spay casting and just simplify everything for you. Like, what is a spay cast? Well, spay cast is nothing more than a dynamic roll cast with a change of direction. That's what it really boils down to. And as we talked about, you can use it with your single hands or your 2-handed rods or a switch rod, whatever here. The outfit that I have here now is a Skagit system like we talked about. It's a very, very simple system. It basically has your backing that goes into a running line, which could be either monofilament or it can be a standard level fly line. That's all it is. That's what shooting line or a running line really is. And if you look, continue down the outfit here, we have a simple loop-to-loop connections, and your running line will loop right to the back of your Skagit head. And there is a front and a back to Skagit heads. They're not reversible, so make sure you put that on right. And then traditionally Skagit heads are very aggressive. They're very thick. They're meant for big payload deliveries. But then another loop-to-loop system like we talked about, a Skagit always has to have a tip system on it. We have another loop-to-loop system that you loop your tips on. And then from there, we talked about the tip. But one of the things that we get frequently asked in the questions is that, A, how long of a tip do we put on our Skagit head? Rule of thumb is you have a single hand rod, you can use 8 and 10 footers. If you have a switch rod, around 10 footers. And if you have a rod over 12 foot tips on the end of your Skagit. And then a lot of times we get, hey, how long do I make my leader section off the end of my sinking line? This all depends on the fish you're fishing for, but generally, rule of thumb, if the water's cold and dirty, we go around 14 inches to 2 feet, and all the way up to 5 or 6 feet, depending on the venue you're fishing. So you have to experiment around with your venue. Hey, back again here to do some spay casting again. So we talked a little bit about the running lines and that, but let's talk a little bit about the grip. If you have a single hand rod, you can do your favorite grip you want, thumb on top, key grip, that works really well too. But these rods, if you have a butt assist or an actual switch rod or 2-handed rod, they're really meant, they work more efficiently with your bottom hand pushing and pulling. But the proper way is everybody wants to grab it with a good tight grip on top. You want to grip it very lightly. My favorite grip is just a very light grip like this, with no pressure, just enough to guide the rod. It's just a thumb on top, 2 fingers on the bottom, and then you take your bottom hand, you make an L, and you come in, and you'll see this nice little ball and socket, and you just pinch it here. That enables you to maneuver around this. When you grab it very tight and stiff, the rod doesn't flex right, and you can't maneuver the rod and pivot the rod. And as we start working down, we're going to do our first series of what we want to really do to perform a spay cast. Is we have to consider the first thing is that this is a Skagit system like we talked about, is where the back of the Skagit head meets the running line. There is a certain distance we want to keep this off the rod tip. So let's take a look at that. Generally speaking, you want to be about, to start out about 6 inches to 1 foot right there. And that gives you a lot of control when it comes down to your cast. So we're going to start out with about 6 inches, and that terminology is called overhang. And that's where we're going to start our first part of the cast. So what's interesting is all spay cast has to have what's called a lift. And this is to break the tension of this heavy Skagit line or your fly line off of the water surface like this. So when you make your lift like this, it's going to have to be very slow. So basically when you make a lift, rather than lifting with the tip of your rod like this, you can see the line chasing you. It keeps chasing you in. It's going to cause a state of urgency for you to make the cast very quickly. So what you're going to do to perform a better, more easily, more controlled chaos is you lift a little more level like a shotgun, and that keeps that line away from you. And once you feel this line unengaged from the river, that is really when you want to start your next step. So that step there was called the lift. Let's look at it one more time. You make the lift. As soon as you feel the line unengaged, that's when you go. If you happen to do this procedure too fast and you drag like this, what ends up happening is the line will want to spring off the water. We want to be in control, and a nice slow lift will allow you to control the line. Nice slow lift, and as soon as you feel it really easy to move, that's when you make the next phase of the spay cast. Hey, we're back here to start covering those spay casting series. We covered the lift, and the lift is very important, probably the most important, but now we're going to talk about the next step, which is the set. Sets the anchor position to follow up with the next step of the cast. But for this video series, we're going to try to make it super simple. We're not going to talk about upstream wind, downstream wind. We're not going to talk about river left, river right. So let's just take a look at the next step, which is going to be the set. So we talked about the lift. The lift breaks the tension. Then we've got to set the anchor. Let's look at that one more time. We're going to lift, the anchor is set, and the anchor, generally speaking, is just roughly about a rod tip away. It doesn't matter if it's upstream or downstream, but just probably if you can get your anchor placed somewhere around the end of your rod tip, right or left side of your casting, you're going to be in good shape to perform a spay cast. Hey, back on the water again to continue this spay casting series we've been talking about. We covered the lift, we covered the set. Now we're going to cover the sweep. So let's just break it down. Let's start again. Here we go. Here's our nice lift. Here's our nice set. But if you notice on the set position, my hands are crossed like this. It's called crossing of the heart. And then also on the set, after you make the set, if you notice, my rod is down towards the water. It's very important to have it down towards the water and not up off the water to create slack. It gives you great continuity and connection to your rod, and also it begins the loading process. So what we'll do now is we'll break it down. Let's look at this set, and then we're going to talk about the sweep. Lift, set, and the sweep is low and high. And this sweep, the object of this sweep is to form the D-loop. The D-loop is the drape of line that's under your rod tip, which is the power of a spay cast, just like the back cast of a single hand cast. This is where the energy is stored. So if you don't have a strong D-loop, you have a small D-loop, you have a very weak forward cast on a spay cast. If you have a very nice big D-loop, you have a lot of power in your spay cast. That's where the power is in that nice D-loop right there, under the drape of the rod, under the rod. Hey, back again to finish up these our series of spay casting here, and we just finished up with the sweep maneuver, but now we're going to get into the key position that you want to be. This key position is going to be roughly the same position as you would if you were single hand casting, the 10 and 2 position. It all depends on how deep you wade. If you're wading deep, you might find yourself a little higher. If you're wading very shallow, you can be a little more comfortable position, up or down like this with the rod if you have a two-handed rod. So let's just take a look, and after we form the D-loop. So we have our lift, we have our set with a nice low rod, and now we're going to go low in this sweep. When we talked about the sweep, we're going to sweep and we form it low, and we get in this key position just like this. It forms the D-loop, and right here, key position. Now we talk about the forward stroke. So let's do a forward stroke here. Let's put it all together. Lift, sweep, low, high, forward stroke, and away she goes. Very simple. One good thing about the forward stroke is if you have a two-handed rod or even a single-hand rod is you always want to lead with your bottom hand. Lead with your bottom hand, and that'll allow you to utilize the rod at the best you can, is lead with the bottom hand. And that'll allow you to have a nice cast. Good pulls will help incorporate the load the rod properly, and try not to push with your top hand. It'll be hard at first, but that'll be maybe one of the major mountains of obstacles you might have to do if you're pushing with your top hand. Hey, we just finished up that spay casting series, but thanks for watching. Hope you learned a little bit about the spay cast. There's so much more to learn, but the cast that we were performing was the snap C cast. So it's a very useful cast in all fishing situations. But next up, just to close everything up, we're going to take a couple different views at some of the snap C casts, just for your viewing, so you get an idea when you put it all together what it looks like.
One more.